Hello friends, this is Viraj and welcome to GS Code. In this particular video, we will be discussing how to use thematic current affairs or international relations that has been compiled by GS Code. So we are moving towards prelims, and from prelims point of view, current affairs is very important. We have discussed in one of the earlier videos, we have discussed what is current affairs. It is updating your information on the topics mentioned in the syllabus. So with respect to international relations, the topic that has been mentioned in your prelims syllabus is current events of national and international importance. That is what your syllabus wants you to focus upon. Okay. When it comes to international relations, so how has this compilation to be used? What we have basically done in this particular compilation, especially with respect to international relations I will speak about, we have divided different themes of international relations. So it is basically a thematic understanding of current affairs of international relations. For example, we have taken into consideration one thing and then we have gone on to in detail in detail look into the important aspects of that particular important events that have taken place around that particular. All right, so theme, events that are important in that particular theme, and we have connected those events to information from the past, or static information with respect to that particular event. All right, then we basically have provided PYQs, previous year's questions, based on similar events that have happened in the past. All right, based on similar contemporary events of the past. And then we have also provided to you practice questions so that you can test your knowledge. With respect to that event. International relations is a very contemporary subject. All right, but what has happened today is dependent on what had happened in the past. All right, what had happened in the past, and hence there is a connection between two. What UPSC generally tends to do is it tends to ask question on the event that has happened right now. All right, and also the basis on which the event has happened. For example, if UPSC is interested in asking about the summit of G20 which happened in India, or the summit of SCO, all right, or the summit of SCO, so what it will do is it will first and foremost want you to look into what happened in the summit of SCO at this year's conference or last year's conference. And then what it might also ask or might also be interested in would be the objective with which SCO was established few years ago. Okay, the objective with which SCO was established few years ago. So these two pieces of information are very important. What has happened today and the basis on which it has happened, and both of this information have been sandwiched together in a systematic manner and provided to you through thematic current affairs of GS Code. All right, thematic current affairs of GS Code. As I told you, its usage or the structure of articles is such that the event that has happened today you will be made familiar with. And then the foundation of that email will be provided to you. The foundation of the event will be provided to you in such a way that you are briefed with that information but not burdened with that information. For example, everything with respect to SEO is not necessary. Okay, what has happened at this conference or this year's conference or last year's conference, yes, that is important. But what has happened maybe 10 years ago, that is not important, or maybe 15 years ago, that is not important. What is so important is the founding principles. So we have provided you with the founding principles of SEO, founding objectives of SEO that remain relevant even today, on the basis of which we basically have become active members of SEO. All right. So both these informations, as I told you now, without overburdening you and in a simplified manner is provided to you. PYQs, as I told you, they are provided from the point of view of you getting a better focus of what in the event is important from UPSC's point of view. Chalo. Now what we will do is we'll get into one sample question. We'll basically get into a sample question. So this is a sample question. This is a question of last year itself. So it will give you better idea of what UPSC is interested in. Alright, what UPSC is interested in. So if I take into consideration, the question, what does it need me to know? Consider the following statements with respect to G20. First statement, the G20 group was originally established as a platform for finance ministers and central bank governors to discuss international economic and financial issues. Second statement, digital public infrastructure is one of India's G20 priorities. Alright, so these are the two statements provided to you. Alright, these are the two statements provided to you. Now, the first question that arises is why this question in itself is asked. This question has been asked or was asked last year because G20 conference was to take place after prelims examination. But it was known na. It was known that G20 conference will take place in India and it will take place after the prelims examination. Even if the G20 conference was to take place after the prelims examination, but it was certain. It was basically certain that G20 will happen in India. Alright, and hence the organization itself was in news. And because the organization was in news, what all had to be learned by you? First and foremost, founding principle or objective, which has become one of the planks of the question, one of the statements of the question. Okay. The second statement is more related to the contemporary events. Okay. The contemporary events, that is orientation of India towards digital public infrastructure. Orientation of India towards digital public infrastructure. Now it was discussed all along that this is one of the most important aspects of G20 that will be discussed by India other than renewable energy, other than infrastructural development, physical infrastructure. Okay. And if you look at G20 conference that happened last year in India, we focused on these three elements the most. Other than bringing peace and all those things, these are the three elements: digital, public infrastructure, renewable energy, and physical infrastructure. These were the three elements that we looked into. Also, African Union became part, but these were the three important elements that we looked into, and digital public infrastructure was discussed the most. Okay. So contemporary, one plank of the question depends upon contemporary event, other plank of the question depends upon founding principles. And the question itself is asked because G20 was to take place in India. So randomly they have not asked any question with respect to an organization which was not in use. Focus was on what has happened and what will basically happen. Okay. So in the same way you have to study international relations also. International relations, 4 to 5 questions maximum are asked, but if you look at the quality of the questions, then I will say they are at easy level. All the questions, not even moderate, they are at easy level. Alright, what aspect of what news has to be covered in international relations? We'll discuss that, but before that, the answer of it is C, both 1 and 2. Alright, both 1 and 2, most of you must be knowing it, as you must be going through previous year's questions. If you are not going through previous year's question, the link of previous year's questions will be provided in the description section. Download it. The GS Core basically has compiled previous year's questions together. Download it. So now let us go through the contents. If you look at the contents, if you basically look at the contents that are provided to you, then I would, or the team of GS Core has categorized international relations into 4 different categories, 4 different spheres. First is with respect to defense exercises, military exercises. Now look, defense exercises or military exercises have not been asked in the past. But what has happened is their importance with respect to India's strategic placement has increased, and defense exercises, they were always tools of international relations for India, but their importance as an instrument of India expanding its standing at the world level has increased tremendously. It has basically magnified tremendously. And because it has increased to such an extent, this year and the years to come, defense exercises as such become an important avenue from which questions might be asked. So if I have to look into defense exercises and as it is provided in the thematic current affairs, what I will look into, first and foremost, I will look into the participants, who basically are the participants of the defense exercise. First and foremost, I will do that. Second thing that I will do with respect to defense exercises is not only the countries, a particular section of defense forces. For example, if Indian Navy took part in it, if Indian Coast Guard took part in it, if Indian Army took part in it, or all the three services took part in it, that has to be taken into consideration. Third is the objective. Third is with respect to objective. What objective that particular defense exercise serves? That also has to be looked into, that also has to be taken into consideration, that also has to be integrated. Alright, next, and this is, I feel, the most important aspect. If you take into consideration IR, तो सबसे ज्यादा most questions are from international institutions, important international institutions. Alright, now with respect to important international institutions, what has to be your orientation towards or your inclination towards? First and foremost, if I was in your place, my first inclination would be reason of why is this organization in news? Most probably the organization will be in news because a convention of that particular organization has taken place, meeting of that particular organization has taken place. Alright, so you have to basically hold strong ground with respect to the reason of why. Alright, though question might not directly come from that particular end. Alright, second thing, with why, where. If the conference happens, have an understanding with respect to where the organization has met, or where the session of that organization or where the conference of the organization has taken place. Again, it is not a question that UPSC generally is interested in. Alright, it is not the question where UPSC is generally interested in, but it will give you a wholesome view. Third and most important, now this is very important. Why ho gaya, where is done. Now, what was achieved? What basically was achieved in that particular conference, in that particular meeting? Alright, that has to be known. What was the goal of that particular meeting? What was the motto of that particular meeting? Official motto is asked very rarely by UPSC, but basically where the meeting took a particular issue to. Alright, what was the end result of that meeting? That has to be known by you, because that is something from where the questions will be asked. One more thing, as we have discussed, original principle. That is why a particular institution was originally created. It has to be paid special emphasis upon. It has to be paid special emphasis upon. So if you answer these four questions, 2 marks तो कहीं नहीं गया. Your 2 marks will be with you. Alright, your 2 marks basically will be with you. Then we can come to India and its neighbors. Very important aspects, very important aspect with respect to India and its neighbor. Take into consideration few pointers. All right. First and foremost is with respect to obviously recent development and the specifics of those developments. For example, India and Nepal have increased their railway connections. Alright, so here I will remember two, three things. First and foremost, I will remember or I will take into consideration stations between which the railway connections have been created. New railway connections have been created or the existing railway connections have been enlarged. Second thing I will take into consideration which ministry or which authority is looking into execution of this project. Third thing which I will take into consideration, second is ministry or institution which is taking into consideration a particular project with the neighboring country. Third thing that I will take into consideration is a particular term that is associated with India's neighbors. Okay, for example, with China, there is a very important term which is always in current affairs, and that is LAC. Alright, you will always find the mention of LAC. So you should basically know what LAC is. It can be a good question taking into consideration current affairs. Alright, and that information is basically provided in the thematic current affairs part of thematic current affairs compiled by GS School. Thematic current affairs compiled by GS School. Alright, moving on, important events in the neighboring countries of India also are necessary from current affairs point of view, especially if the event is oriented towards a particular term being used. For example, colored revolution. So China recently what it did was it proclaimed that colored revolutions in the country will not be tolerated. Now it is your responsibility to tell me what are colored revolution in the comment section. So यहाँ पे what has happened is an important event has taken place and a term was associated with it, है ना? So that term becomes important when UPSC many a times what it does is it asks few questions with respect to a term. For example, Jasmine Revolution. ठीक है, Jasmine Revolution was once asked. So those terms become important. Also, entities that come in news because of an event or because of an. Alright, those entities have to be understood. For example, if you take into consideration last year, so there was war between Hamas and Israel. Alright, obviously what came to the news was terms like Hamas. What basically is Hamas? What basically is Gaza? What basically is West Bank? Okay, what basically is Hezbollah? So these terms, they are in news. You read about them in the newspaper, but what do is you avoid getting to the core of it, and that core becomes the plank for question. So do not avoid those core. Do not avoid those particular terms, and we have provided it to them. We have basically provided it to you. Next, if you take into consideration now, so bilateral groupings, treaties become important. Bilateral, multilateral groupings, treaty. Now in this, what has to be first and foremost taken into consideration? First and foremost, full forms have to be known. Why full forms have to be known? Because full form in itself will give you idea of what that grouping is. Not because UPSC is asking question on what is the full form and so UPSC does not ask those kind of questions. UPSC, from the point of view of UPSC prelims, full form are important because they will give you a good idea of what that particular thing is. Alright. Second, with respect to agreements and with respect to groupings, again take into consideration the core objectives. objective or objectives, you have to take them into consideration. And again, UPSC is more interested in general objectives. It will not ask you in specifics about the object. For example, if a particular organization aims to provide growth in food production by 4%. Alright, now UPSC is not interested in knowing by how many percent the growth of food production will be targeted by that particular organization in a year. वो 4% पे क्वेश्चन नहीं पूछेगा. It will not ask question on 4%. It is just interested in knowing whether you have comprehended that this organization is oriented towards development of food production. Alright, so remember the core objectives or objectives and remember them in a general way, not in a specific. Alright, then basically countries involved. Countries involved. With respect to countries involved, now what I will suggest you is, if the members in that particular organization are 10 or less than 10, then remember the names. If you do not remember the names, okay, of a particular grouping because there are too many members in it, it's absolutely fine. There is no reason to worry. But then check out if India is the member of that particular grouping, if China is the member of that particular grouping, if Pakistan is the member of that particular grouping, if United States is the member of that particular grouping, if Russia is the member of that particular grouping. India, China, Pakistan, Russia, United States. Look at these 5 countries. Okay, because UPSC is known to ask you questions on the basis of membership of these countries. Alright. Other thing with respect to groupings is, if India is part of it, what will India get? What will India get out of this particular group? Alright. Once you are done with this, I think more or less your studies with respect to 4 to 5 questions is absolutely done, and you can rest assured of gaining those 8 to 10 easy marks. 8 to 10 easy marks. Again, if there are any issues that you face with respect to studying IR from the point of view of children, you can contact us. We are there to help you. Don't worry at all. Alright friends, so this was all from me. This was the way in which thematic current affairs has to be discussed. I have put down the 4 areas that have to be focused upon, and thematic current affairs basically has been divided on the basis of these 4 areas, or we have focused on these particular 4 areas, the ones that I have discussed. Alright, focus on them. आपके marks कहीं नहीं जाएंगे. You will basically get those marks. That is my guarantee. Don't worry. All the best. Thank you so much for being part of this discussion. Bye.